Welcome to AA Beyond Belief, the podcast. I'm your host, John S. Today I'll be speaking with our friend Ben about Step 3. We made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understood Him. Oh my, what to do, what to do. Well, hello, welcome back, Ben. I appreciate you joining us this Saturday morning.
Yeah, thanks, Sean. I enjoyed our last conversation a great deal. I'm looking forward to talking more about this.
I did too, and that turned out to be one of our more popular podcasts, actually. I think the steps mean a lot to people, regardless of your belief system. If you're in Alcoholics Anonymous, you're going to approach the 12 steps, and those of us that approach them from a secular perspective sometimes have a little difficulty, and it means a lot to people to hear, that it's possible to do. So today we're going to be talking about Step 3, which will be interesting. I've known some militant atheists who will not even bother with Step 3. They don't even see any sense interpreting it. But I think it's an important step, and I think it's worth discussing. But the step is written, and correct me if I make a mistake, but we made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understood Him. So, Ben, tell me, how did you approach that step?
How did I approach that step? Well, I know I was asked to, when I initially worked the steps with another man, I was asked to, consider the idea that there's a possibility that there's a higher power, and I definitely considered that. I sometimes say in meetings I have contempt after lots of investigation for this, but I definitely considered it. But to me, you and I have been getting down the nitty-gritty of what really works in a step, and to me it's like it's making a decision to let go of my old way of thinking or trying to have my way with doing things the exact same way I used to do it, and committing to trying to do something different. I mean, that's really as simple as I can boil it down to.
Exactly. That's how I see it too. It started out for me a little bit different, I guess, because I was really trying to do it with a belief in a God. But it turns out that the belief in a deity is a very small part of the step. The biggest part of the step was a decision, like you just said, a decision to really change your life, to stop doing things the way that you had been doing them in the past. But when I approached this step, the way that we did it in my Big Book loving group was I would read sections of the Big Book repeatedly, and I believe it was, I can't remember what chapter it was, but that chapter, there's a paragraph that was a very big part of the step for me, which still applies, by the way. Mm-hmm. And I'm going by memory. Selfishness, self-centeredness, that we think is the root of our troubles, driven by 100 forms of fear, self-seeking, self-delusion, self-pity. We step on the toes of our fellows and they retaliate, seemingly without provocation. But invariably we find that at some time in the past, we have made decisions based on self, which later place us in a position to be hurt. So our troubles, we think, are basically of our own making. They arise out of ourselves, something like that.
Yeah.
So for me, it turned out that this step was almost a mini inventory where I understood the depths of my self-centeredness and the dangers of that. You want to talk about that a little bit? Because I think that this could be a little bit dangerous. We don't want to beat ourselves up for being self-centered bastards, but at the same time, I think there is something to this.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I think it's dicey territory, for lack of a better word. I can get behind all of that reading. Sometimes the way it beats it into our head about how self-centered and selfish we are, I think can be damaging, because I think, and maybe I'm thinking wrong on this, I suppose the book was written for, people, the lowest of the low as far as being chronically drunk. So likely it seems like you're living on that self-will so much, but really you're acting out of instinct. I mean, that is the disease of alcoholism. So, my own personality, and maybe I'm self-deluded myself, but part of my growth in recovery has been becoming more, I won't say selfish. You'll hear it in meetings where people say, I need to be more selfish, or it's a selfish program. I don't believe that. I think it's a program, for me at least, first and foremost, of self-concern. I had to learn to have self-concern first and foremost. One of my, for lack of a better word, character defects was I was always worried about what everybody else thought, or trying to please everybody else, or make sure I didn't rock the boat. So for me to speak up and be more assertive is growth. Whereas sometimes I listen to that passage you wrote, and I wonder how people that feel like I do or have the same type of personality I do or issues would feel by hearing that. It's I don't know. But then I go back on it too, and as you're reading it, I'm like nodding my head to myself, and I'm like, yes, I can see how many times how my deluded thinking about things, my always only relying on what I thought, especially when you're dealing with an addicted brain, was extremely dangerous. And then I would react out of this, and I still do this today. I would react out of that hypersensitivity that I have, and then I'd stomp all over somebody else's toes, and then they'd freak out on me, and I'd be like, whoa, wait a second, you were the one who was saying this and saying that. And half the time, people weren't even saying anything there. It was just what I was reading into what they were saying. Now, on the other hand, I have pretty good intuition, and I know quite a bit about psychology and things like that. So it's not good for me to presume that, but it's also what I'm trained in. So I agree with you. There's a middle ground to be found on this, because I can see how, and I'll even put it this way. I think our disease, for lack of a better word, is one of impulsiveness. I mean, that's what the brain sets us up to do when it becomes physically addicted. So if I'm always acting out of instant gratification all the time, I'm not making good decisions. It's about, recovery to me is about making those little decisions day by day that end up resulting in a pretty good result. Much like, say, if you invested for your retirement, it's not about winning the lottery and putting that money away. It's the people who get there tend to be the people who diligently put a little bit away and let the power of compound interest work for them. So, so to get out of that old thinking of, I want what I want right now, or I just want to feel good right now, or I just want to get drunk right now, somewhere in there we got to find, like, no, this is going to take some time. I've got to be a little measured about this. I've got to, I maybe don't have the hope right now or the faith right now, for lack of a better word, but I have to trust this process and that things are going to be better. I suppose this step is about that, like putting some faith in this process.
I think so. Something you said about acting on instinct rather than thinking through, I think is a big part of this, because when I was drinking, during the worst years of my drinking, the last 5 years or so of my drinking, I was always reacting to whatever crisis was in my life. I never could plan anything out. It was always a struggle to somehow land on my feet, to get out of whatever mess I was in. That's how I lived for 5 straight years. And I think I kind of conditioned my brain to work like that, so that everything was a reaction to whatever happened in my life. My boss looked at me the wrong way, or any little thing, I would just react from whatever feeling of fear I may have been feeling at the time. So I think that I had that working for me. But I was 2 years sober by the time I got to the step. Now, remember, at the group I went to, it took a lot of time to go through the steps, because you have to read the book over and over and over again.
Right.
But so I was 2 years sober, and I believe I was about 2 years sober, yeah. And it was during that time I was having a lot of difficulty in my life. I was having arguments with people. I was getting angry. It just seemed like I was in conflict with people a lot. And I would talk to my sponsor about this, and he would always refer me back to that paragraph I just recited, which is why I have it memorized. And he would always ask me to look at my part, and where was I selfish, or where was I self-centered. And in the very beginning, I thought, this is bullshit. I'm not a selfish person. I'm a good person. I try to do good things for other people. But after a while, I could begin to see that, I was thinking about myself a lot more, and I wasn't thinking about the other person. I would do things that were absolutely selfish without even really realizing that they were selfish. And I began to realize that this way of living, this totally self-absorbed way of life, wasn't going to work for me. I needed to find another way to live. So I made a decision to change. And that's what I needed to change, besides just not drinking. I needed to change that part of me that made it impossible to have healthy relationships with other people.
Yeah, I agree 100%. And as much talk in AA as there is about powerlessness, I believe this step is about becoming empowered. Like the things that you talked about, it's like, oh, hey, I'm realizing that if I don't react the same way, I might get different results. It's like you're part of the fight then. It's like if we don't realize that about ourselves, our life just tends to keep going that way you were talking about, like chaos and crisis to crisis, and even the smallest things in the world feel like crisis when that's going on. So as much as we talk about powerlessness, I think this step is all about empowerment. And I think we get so hung up on what's on the other side of the equation. If we really are talking about giving up our old ways and our old tendencies towards thinking and trying to do something different. But in AA, so much of the worry seems to be on the other side of it. Well, what's your higher power? What's your higher power? What's your higher power?
Yeah.
It's the other half of the equation that is doing the actual work, I think. It is letting that stuff go. And I think combined with step 2 and 3 is about letting go of being such a control freak. So as a whole, I think, they roll together pretty well when you look at them in more of this, I don't want to say generic way, but the way we've been talking about the stuff. So it's like you admit you have a problem. You came to believe that there's something to be found here in this process at AA or in doing whatever it is we're doing, and then you make a decision to commit yourself to trying to do it. That being said, though, I mean, there was tons of times in my life where I made a decision to do things differently, and it seemed like that decision went down the crap pipe, in a hurry. So I will absolutely give AA credit for keeping me on that beam better and keeping me active in continuing to make that decision.
I think you're right that the God part of the equation is the more insignificant part. And maybe that's just because of us being atheists, but truly it's the decision. We made a decision. That's really what this step is all about. Once you admit that you have a problem, and once you come to believe that something can help you with that problem, the next logical step is to make a decision to do something, right? This is the experience part of the step. They say that this is an action step, the first of the action steps, and I do believe that, but there's also an experience to it. And that is what we just said there. Boy, I give up. I can't handle it anymore. I'm an alcoholic. I need help. I believe that AA can help me. I'm going to make a decision to start going to meetings, and I start going to meetings. And I think that is the experience of the first 3 steps from our actual experience. Would you agree with that? You see it that way?
I do feel that way. And I'd even, in more of a human sense, to take AA out of the equation even, I mean, I think AA is great, but I think it is a good human thing to do to be connected to other people who are, and for our purpose in AA, other people who are trying to do the same thing we are, just trying to change our lives and be better people, and have found a way to help do that where it seemed like we just could not do it before. I mean, how many times did I try to do, for me at least, this is the truth, there are so many times I tried to do what AA asked me to do before I got to AA on my own. And again, I just fizzle out. Like, there's a lot of things that I learned in my different, whatever you want to call them, spiritual quests or whatever the heck Ben was doing at that time to try and better himself. And I learned them, but then, again, I just didn't have a process of staying engaged, of reminding myself of that. It was like this all or nothing thinking I had, where if I learned something once, it was always in my memory banks, and for then forward, I would always, practice that perfectly. I mean, that was the broken thought that I had to get out of my head. It's not just learn it once and it's there forever. You got to work that thing.
Yeah, that's how I see it too. Now, it says in our literature that it's just a beginning when we've decided to go to AA as a solution to our problem. That's just a beginning. However, I think you could stop there and be okay, and you can say you've done all 3 steps. That if you've admitted you have a problem, you believe that something can help you, and you made a decision to go get help, I think you've done the first 3 steps, period. Now, if you choose to go further, I think that's great, because there is more to be gained from the experience. I think having the experience is one thing, but learning from the experience and applying it to your life is something else. So for me, it was actually constructive to start for the very first time in my life, really, to start being more introspective and taking a look at my actions and how and the conflicts that I was having with people. And for the very first time, not by looking at the other person's part, but really taking a look at my part, which was what my self-centeredness, basically, just taking a look at that. Now, like I said in the very beginning, you have to be so careful with this stuff because, we want to be able to look at the self-centeredness not in a judgmental way. It's a very human thing to be self-centered. In fact, when you look into 12 and 12, when you get into the step, and I'm just kind of going by memory. It's been a while since I've read this, but it talks a lot about natural instincts that's how we act. We act on our instincts, totally natural. But for the alcoholic, and I don't know if this is really true, if it's specifically for alcoholics, but maybe it is true for a lot of us, that we demand far more from our instincts than perhaps we should, and that imbalance causes a problem. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, this is where I can get behind and maybe say, wow, they really had something figured out that they didn't even know they had figured out, because I think we talked about the last podcast, the instinct part of your brain is where that physical dependence lies. So, yeah, alcoholics are living out of that instinct. As let's just call it alcoholism for lack of a better word, as that dependence increases, it kind of climbs that totem pole of needs, which is why you see when we get to the more chronic stages, we'll forego food, we'll forego shelter in the name of alcohol. So yeah, they're definitely onto something about that too. But then on the other hand, the side of me says it's also a natural instinct, and it's what helps keep us alive. So many things in AA that maybe get under my skin a little bit are the extremes. It's like either you're selfish, egocentric, self-centered bastard, or you're, pure as the driven snow, and you're got a life of service that's dedicated to AA and helping people every waking second. It's like there's a middle ground in there that needs to be found, and when I'm bouncing back and forth between those two things, it's kind of like a place for shame to grow. And sometimes when sponsors will say to people, I believe, well, what's your part? There's never an option in there that maybe you don't have a part. It's always, what's your part? What's your part? What's your part? Which is, like you said, it is a great habit to get into, to say, well, what might be my part in here? The truth is, every once in a while, maybe we don't have a part. Maybe we're just dealing with something that's really difficult. And so we become empowered. We become empowered by understanding that, hey, other human beings have their days and have their moments too. Maybe I need the understanding of that. So there's where that empowerment comes in too.
Yeah.
It gets into that shamey, blamey thing where, to the point where, you hear horror stories about people revealing their traumas to their sponsors, and they get asked what's their part. Like, oh, you were, a young kid and you were abused, and, well, what was your part? And sometimes people say, well, you didn't speak up. See, to me, that is abuse on a sponsor's part. To me, is like blaming a victim for their own trauma. It's like when you're younger, you don't have that voice.
This is really deep stuff, and it gets us in trouble because, I'm not a psychologist. I'm not trained in this kind of stuff, but I do know that human beings are very complex. It's not that we're all good or that we're all bad, or that, there's just a lot of gray areas, that we have a little bit of everything in us. And to say that we're just selfish, that's just part of it. Sometimes we are. Sometimes it was a decision that we made that later placed us in a position to be hurt, but sometimes it wasn't. Sometimes it was some other person's decision to hurt us. It's just very, very, it is dicey stuff. But for me, I guess when I was doing this in the very, very beginning, I was practicing real black and white thinking, because that's just where I was in my life at the time, and the type of people that I had in my life at the time. So I was constantly looking at myself as the bad guy, the person that was always causing all the problems in my life. That's not necessarily healthy, but at least it got me into the habit of starting to look at myself and trying to look at my part in this anyway. But what ultimately happened to me, Ben, is I got to a point in my life where I realized that I had more problems than just drinking. I had something I needed to look at. And I made a decision to change. Now, for me at the time, what that meant was I was ready to get with my sponsor, and believe this is what we actually did. We got on our knees together, and we prayed the third step prayer. And that was my decision to do that. And my sponsor at the time told me that was the most that was the most meaningful way to do it, the humbling way to do it, to get on your knees with the other person. And I remember at the time feeling kind of uncomfortable doing that, but that's what I did. And there are people out there that do that today who are comfortable with it, and I think that's great because for them, this is something where they do want to bring their God into play because they believe that they have a God that helps them. Well, for me as a secular person, I don't believe that there's a God, so it's not necessary for me to do that part of it. But I can make a decision within myself to make a change, and I can make a commitment. I can make a commitment by going to meetings and following through with the rest of the steps.
Yep, absolutely. There is power in that. There's something very humbling about putting yourself on your knees, and that's a sign of commitment. And I sure don't. Anybody can do whatever they want there. I remember I heard a story one time though. I have a friend of mine in the program who is Jewish, and her sponsor fired her because she wasn't willing to get down on her knees and say that prayer. Well, we know Jewish people don't tend to kneel when they pray. So, I mean, wow.
Yeah.
There's got to be a little leeway in there somewhere. It's like we try and, my concern is we make it difficult for people who want to be sober to stay sober when we get so caught up in the little details of it. And I just don't think it has to be that hard.
Absolutely. Yes. The way that it's funny when you come up in AA, when you're basically raised in AA. I came in I was fairly young, and God, I was really raised by that group, and that was the only AA I knew was doing things that particular way. And for whatever reason, I just bought into it. I never questioned it until many, many, many decades later. But I think the healthier approach for that group or that sponsor of mine, the healthier approach that they could have taken would have been to say, if this is your tradition, if this is what you're comfortable doing, if this is in accordance with your belief system, then by all means we will do this. But if it's not, that's perfectly fine. Mm-hmm. We got to get out. That's the situation that we're in right now in Alcoholics Anonymous, that we have this real fundamentalist, back to basics stream within the movement that doesn't make room for people like us, and it's scaring a lot of people away. And we need to stop and say, hey, listen, back in the old days, the 1930s, they all got on their knees, and this is what they did. But you know what? You don't necessarily have to do it that way. Maybe
it's the counselor and me speaking, but it's like the sponsor who practices forcing people to do things in an exact certain way. It's almost like they think they don't make it their job at all to get to know their sponsee. It's almost just like, well, of course you must regard me as this great guru, so I'm going to tell you exactly how to do it. It's, to me, the depth of the connection that you get with the sponsee-sponsor relationship is getting to know the other person and trying to find out what maybe works for them, not just get on this factory line and get pumped out as a great recovered alcoholic at the end of it.
Yep. My sponsor and he's a great guy. He helped me out a lot. I'm thinking about, I've had 4 different sponsors since I've been sober, and they've kind of been with me during certain periods of my life. And this one particular sponsor, he was a very rigid person, but I kind of maybe needed that. I don't know. I think that he was a good person, that he was really trying to help me the best that he could. Mm-hmm. But it wouldn't help me now. And I meet other people coming into the program today where that type of sponsor relationship is downright damaging. So we have to be so careful. I think it's really important that if somebody goes to an Alcoholics Anonymous meeting, they're new to the program, and they go to a particular group go to other groups. You got to go to a bunch of different groups because every group is different. And you might go to one group that has a very rigid, dogmatic, specific, prescribed way of going through the steps. That might be that group's way of doing it. But then you can go to a completely other group where it's totally open, that allows you to have your own experience. So there's a wide range of Alcoholics Anonymous out there. Every single group and every single meeting is different. So newcomers out there should experience a lot of different meetings before they decide what approach they're going to take with this, I think.
Absolutely. And I want to agree with you too, John. I think, that dogmatism and rigidity does have its place more often in the early going part of recovery because it's just about doing what you got to do to, make it one more day sometimes. So it's not, I'm not a fan of it, but it certainly has worked for a lot of people. Absolutely.
That's true. And I think also just for where I was in my life at the time, my problems were pretty simple at that particular time. I mean, I was doing things like I would be dishonest, or I'd do something that would, I'd eat someone's food. I'd do really selfish things that were pretty obvious, that I did something that was self-centered. But I honestly couldn't see it. I didn't see my self-centeredness. And now now it's obvious. So at that time, I did have these really stark situations. But now in my life, fortunately I've grown that it becomes a little bit more difficult to see my self-centeredness.
Yep.
It's a little more subtle now.
I was just going to relay an experience I had. I ran into a friend from my hometown the other day, and he asked me what I'd been doing and all that stuff, and I told him, I spent some time as a drug and alcohol counselor, and he goes, oh, well, yeah, man, I had 3 DUIs. And I'm like, oh, yeah, man, I had 2, so that was enough for me. And he goes, yeah, Lincoln cops, they're just always out to get you, and they, you don't even barely have to speed and you're getting pulled over. And it was just one of those moments, like you just said, where I realized how much my thinking has changed, Like that line of thinking doesn't generally pop into my head very much these days. It's more like my default, again, this is thanks to AA. My default is to go, well, wait a second, Ben, where might have you been, doing something? And not in a shaming way, but it is a good thing to always check that out first before I open my mouth up.
That's the most dangerous thing about alcoholism and probably drug addiction too. It really, our brains get warped. I was that way back in the 80s when I was getting my DWIs. There was a group called Mothers Against Drunk Driving that was really had a significant impact on changing the drunk driving laws and making them more difficult. Well, I hated that group. I hated them. I thought that it was getting to where people couldn't even drink anymore. I thought it was a horrible, terrible thing. But you know what? That actually ended up saving, God knows, millions of lives were saved. Yeah. I was even talking to my doctor. He's an older guy, about, back in the 50s and the 60s. And he said, man, we were killing each other. He says, every time that we never thought anything of it, drinking and driving back then, So, yeah. But, yeah, I honestly thought that society was out of hand. It certainly wasn't my fault. Every time I was thrown in jail, I thought it was ridiculous.
Damn political correctness and letting us drive around drunk. Liberal hippies.
I was also pissed off when they started complaining about smoking in the office.
Yeah. It's amazing that slow change and evolving of society is. I mean, like you said, it was regular for me to drive home every single night that I went out and got drunk. I would drive home. When I was listening back to our podcast, you said something like, I didn't seem to not be able to drive drunk even though I told myself I wasn't going to. That was my experience completely. I'd go out and I'd be like, don't get too drunk, or don't drive home if you get drunk. And then as soon as I'd be drunk enough, it'd be like, oh, screw that. That's for people who don't know what the hell they're doing. I'm the best drunk driver there is. And, I set the cruise control in town. I'm not that dangerous. I mean, it's ridiculous to look back at that.
Yeah, it's a horrible thing because, I remember during my second DUI, they actually tried to teach controlled drinking at this place. They tried to teach you how to pace your drinks and stuff like that. And I actually did try that, and it didn't work for me. And I ended up getting drunk and blacked out and driving. But you know what? Technology has a way of taking care of things because they now have this mechanism whereby in order to start your car, you have to blow into a breathalyzer, otherwise your car won't start.
Yep.
Isn't that great? Done that. Now, there's no way around that, is there? Unless you get in someone else's car and drive it, I guess.
Yeah, usually you have to blow in it to get it started, and then within 5 minutes it goes off again, and then about every half hour after that.
Oh, really?
I had heard. I don't know if it's true, but I had heard that they have it in one of the Asian countries, and it's almost going to be standard on every car. So who knows if that will happen? But yeah,
that's interesting.
You said something earlier that made me think about something. You were talking about the selfish, self-centered thinking. I can remember I spent like the majority of my time thinking about what everybody else had done wrong and very little time on thinking about what my part may have been. And again, I think AA has helped swing me in the way of empowerment and realizing that, I probably think 10% of the time about what other people are doing and 90% on what I can do different. So the second half of that first step, I cringe a little bit too when we hear that in meetings because I think we are we have more power over more things than we think when we come in. Like, yeah, we're control freaks and we're trying to control everything, but I have way more influence than I think I do, and not in like an arrogant way. It just means if I come at a conversation with somebody irate to begin with, I've already influenced that conversation in a way that might be screwing it for its entirety. Well, now if I can come to things and be approachable and be congenial and just be kind to begin with, we have much more power than we think we do. We have much more influence over, they talk about positivity and happiness and how it's contagious. It literally is contagious. Like, if you're angry and negative all the time, it's like a cold. Other people can catch it. There's been scientific studies that can prove it. So we have a lot more power than we think we do too.
No, I agree. And this actually is very helpful stuff. Now, like I say, if all you do is make a decision to go to AA, as far as I'm concerned, you've worked the step. But if you do go further and you start reading our literature and you start looking at behaviors and stuff, it does kind of give you a barometer to gauge your own mental, emotional state. Like I was saying a little earlier, it's a little bit more subtle now for me, because I'm not blatantly self-centered where I just do things that are just blatantly selfish that hurt people. But I do sometimes my thinking can move away from other people to more about whatever's going on in my life. And when that happens, I start going down a road where things start getting a little out of hand. I'll just kind of give you an example. When I first was getting this group started, the We Agnostics group here in Kansas City, it was an amazing experience because we started out with just two of us. And then another person would show up, and another person would show up, another person would show up. And each of these new people, I felt like I was invested in that person. I really cared about that person. I wanted that person to do well, and I thought about them a lot. I would find myself during the day thinking about those people, thinking about that group. And I noticed that during that time, I was no longer worried about my boss or problems at work. It put me in a pretty good place. Now, 2 years later, almost 2 years later, the group has been pretty well established, and I still care about people, don't get me wrong, and I still think about them, but I find myself creeping in there a little bit more. I start thinking more about worrying about the website and the next article I'm going to publish, or worrying about all kinds of crap that's going on in my life. And it's okay to think about that kind of stuff, but I have a tendency to sometimes latch on to that and worry about it a little bit too much, and it begins to take over, and I begin getting depressed and behaving in response to whatever the stuff is going on in my life. But if I can just somehow break that cycle and start thinking about and caring about other people, it does somehow help. Is there any sound psychology to any of that?
Well, I think so. I mean, and I can't cite any studies off the bat, but I can say that I agree with that for sure. And I think what you're talking about too is, I think, what the dogmatists would warn us about, the danger of, the longer you're away from your first drink, the closer you are to your next, or something. I think that's what they're talking about. If we get too comfortable with, being sober, it's easy to rest on our laurels. But yeah, we're just getting our life back on some level too. So we've got worries that are legitimate. But I know what you mean, because I can get obsessive about some stuff. Like, as you know, we just had a baby, and it's like awesome. It has put so many things in perspective. And my annoyances with some of my traditional meetings and the dogmatists and things like that, it just kind of vanished for a while. But then I can get, if I dig into those waters a little bit, I can get there and I'm just gone. I'm out of the present moment, and I'm thinking about this. And the next thing you know, I'm worrying about saving for our daughter's college fund and hopefully how we can.
Isn't that great?
Money. And yeah.
That's great. It gets you're thinking about her. You're thinking about the baby. You're thinking about your daughter. And that is moving away all the other thoughts that were, that's pretty cool.
It is cool, but then I can even take those thoughts and turn them into something bad. Like, then I obsess about, well, where am I going to put the money for the right place to get the best return for her college fund?
Right.
It's just like that. It's my thinking. It's not AA's fault. It's not the world's fault. It's not whatever's going on at work or with a spouse. It's my tendency to get obsessive about everything. even the good things in my life. So it's just about finding that moderation, I think.
And I don't want to scare you, but I can't even imagine putting a kid through college now, how much that would cost.
Oh, definitely. I've definitely thought about that. You think about even what you just need to put away each year just to total up to that, let alone, counting for the growth. Yeah, it can be overwhelming. But then
when
I also
went
need
to KU in 1980, I believe this is right. It's hard to believe, but I swear to God that my first semester was like $400-$500.
Yeah. I think University of Nebraska in '94, I think I remember my tuition for the first semester was either, I can't remember if it was $1,500 or $3,000. It was
Wow.
One was either, yeah, it's crazy to think.
How that's changed. Anyway.
I've got a few more thoughts written down here from going through the 12 and 12 earlier too.
Okay, let's go through it.
It talked about how the first two steps were about acceptance, and this third is about willingness. That I can definitely agree with. I found that part of the 12 by 12 very good. I was like, yes. This third step is on some level about willingness. Are you going to do it or not? Okay, you making a decision to do it? Okay, now let's go get to work.
And that's where it was saying the first two steps being acceptance steps. Those and that's what we were talking about last time, because there's really no action involved. Really, those are just experiences that we had that we accept. Mm-hmm. So now the willingness is part. There's some action in becoming willing, I guess, is what it's talking about there.
Yeah, and it talks a little bit too about the act of giving over our will actually results in independence. Yes. I love that part of the 12 by 12, because you think, I was listening to a podcast about Louis C.K. talking about having kids, and he says all the things you're scared that you're going to lose in your life from having kids are things that are generally good to lose anyway, like you were talking about, like. I don't worry about the stupid stuff quite as much. I'm more focused on, our life together and things like that in a good, healthy way. So it's giving up my will actually results in something that's good for me in the long run. And it does give you independence, I think, and freedom.
You brought up, that's an interesting topic you brought up too, and I'm glad that you're looking through the 12 and 12, because I kind of forgot about that. There's a big discussion there about self-will and willpower too, I believe. And it talks, it's in the 12 and 12, I believe it says that our problem wasn't lack of will. We have incredible willpower as alcoholics and addicts. I mean, just to go through all the crap that we go through and endure that, it takes all that willpower. But it was the way that we used our will that was the problem. Now, most people are going to approach this thing from a religious perspective. So how do you look at letting go of self-will or turning something over? How do you do that from a secular point of view?
Yeah, to me, again, I focus on that first half. It's just about me letting go of needing to be right or being in control. Maybe this is a little bit too much woo for people who aren't, I'm not a spiritual person either. I don't really care for that word, but about kind of letting things happen organically and just trusting this process. Or like, when I first went to college, it was beyond me to even think about the end of the semester. Like I remember I would look forward in the syllabus, and if like week 10 of 15 had some huge long term paper to do, I'd be like, well, guess I've got to change this class and go to another one. That's how bad my thinking was. It was that just that impulsive thinking. Whereas now, with more of a recovery mindset, it's like, okay, I just got to do what I got to do each day, and I'm going to get the result eventually, or something else may come up. So it's about kind of letting go of that need to grab a hold of something so hard to try and get it to turn out the way you want it to turn out, and just kind of letting go and putting in your work and doing your diligence and having a little bit of excitement and interest in seeing where things go, rather than fear and frustration about things not happening the way I expect them to. That's kind of a way I look at this too. Does that make sense?
It does perfectly, especially what you said about trusting the process. I remember in Santa Monica, Ward Ewing was talking about spirituality in AA and how really the difference between us atheists and the believer is basically language. And he said, instead of letting go and letting God, why not just let go? If you need to turn something over, you don't need to turn it over to anything necessarily. Just turn it over.
Right.
And I think that is a lot to this. So yeah, I guess when we're talking about will here, I can recognize that my old way of doing things prior to AA was not working. And my old way of doing things was to be totally, and we talked about this a little bit in step 2, be totally self-sufficient, not let people know I had problems, not even really in-depth look at the problems myself, but just somehow try to make everything work, I guess, was my way of doing it. And that didn't work. I can't live that way anymore. If I lived that way, I would still be drinking, and I probably wouldn't last very long. So
yeah, I
needed to
theory.
let go of that.
Yes. Sorry to interrupt you, John.
No, you're fine.
I have my little theory that the people who believe in God so hard are the biggest control freaks in general, because it's like even that saying, let go, let God, to me it shows what control freaks we are as alcoholics in general. It says, well, okay, I'm only going to let this go if there's a God that's got it. You know what I mean? It's like,
right.
No, just let it go. Like you said, let it go, see what happens. You don't need to be in control of it. It doesn't mean we don't put in our work. We do. But, let it go and let go of the outcome. You know, how much time did I spend miserable because I wanted to try and make everything turn out the way I thought it needed to turn out?
And let's not forget what this decision is really all about. I think it is about that trusting the process. What you said, that's what it's about. I'm making a decision to trust the process and to go on with the rest of the steps. That's really my decision here. Is that how you would kind of see this?
Yeah. I agree with that a lot. And where, step 2 is about finding some hope or realizing that you found some hope, maybe came to believe. 3 is about having faith in this process and putting some trust in it. And I'll even say this, like sometimes you see those memes or people will say, I just got to trust that God's going to make sure everything turns out fine or whatever. But I think what AA and recovery mindset has given me is understanding that no matter how things turn out, I'm going to be okay. Even if things happen that I'm not okay. Maybe I'm physically harmed. Maybe I can make it through. But that I can handle it. I can go through it. I mean, God forbid I get diagnosed with some terminal disease or something. I can make it through it. I don't know. And that's an extreme example. But today, because of being involved in this and going on this little journey, it's I don't have as many expectations about how things are going to be. It's easy for me to say right now when I'm a healthy person and nothing's really going wrong in my life. But I have gained faith in the fact that no matter what comes up, I can learn how to handle it. I mean, it's so easy for us alcoholics to have something go wrong in our life and say, oh my God, how the hell am I going to make it through this? This has come up. And I mean, we hear each other go through stuff like that. But the truth is, everybody sitting here right now listening to this has made it through everything that's happened in their life. We maybe don't feel the best. We maybe don't feel great. We're maybe sad right now, but we're here. We've made it through. So all those times we thought we weren't going to, we have.
And, when I was going through that period of time working the step with my sponsor, where I was really kind of focusing on the reading about selfishness and so forth and self-centeredness, it did bring to light for me that I needed to change the way I lived, and that step 3 was a mini inventory for me, because I really had to stop and take a look at how I was living my life, so that I knew that in order to make a decision to change my life, I needed to look at how I was living my life at the time and where it wasn't working. And I think that was part of this. And a good start for me was just looking at where an emphasis on myself was involved. And so, I came to a point where, yes, I was ready to make a decision to go on to do step 4, because I had learned enough about myself from looking at my part in all of these conflicts I was having with people in my early sobriety, that I was ready to dig deeper and start doing an inventory.
Well, I'll say too, I got to get my little beef in there, I guess. But when sometimes I'd have clients come into my office when I was a counselor, and it's like they were so diehard on the God thing, and it was sometimes that belief can be a cop out when it comes to this self-will thing. I think not always. There are plenty of people who are very, letting go of self-will and believe in being in tune with God and releasing themselves to His will and care. But sometimes it is it's an excuse to still act out of self-will. It's a way to close off your life to other people who might be able to give you some good input, because now it's just you and God. You're just relying on God. And sometimes I think you're just listening to your own thoughts there. And I'll give an example. I used to be a believer. And I can remember I had a really, really tough breakup at one point in my life when I was a believer. And I can remember thinking and feeling like, wow, I think God wants me to try and get back together with this person. I had broke off the relationship.
Oh,
but
wow.
It was one of those things where it was difficult. But I can remember thinking like, God is telling me I need to be back together with this person. It was an awful, 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 chaotic relationship on both sides. Both of us were awful. And now when I look back at it, I was just really in a lot of pain and sad, and I wanted that pain to go away. So it was so easy for me to convince myself that God was telling me to do this because I just wanted the pain to go away. And I don't say that to crap on somebody else's belief, but I think what's sometimes going on under that surface with people who grab the God thing so hard, and I don't necessarily see them connected to other human beings in a way that's benefiting their life, it is a way to stay isolated, and it is a way to stay in self-will and stay egocentric and stay in that rigid control place. And now they got God, and man, you can do a lot of damage when you are a arrogant, egotistic, driven asshole, and you've got God on your side. And I'm not speaking out of judgment. I'm speaking from experience. I did that.
You know, that's a very good point, I think, Ben. And I think it's something that could actually help a lot of people because, I don't know if I ever was that had enough faith to actually think that I was ever inspired by God for anything. But I know there definitely are people who do look at their own their own emotional state and think it's a message from God. And perhaps these people, and I respect that. I want to come from a place of respect for their belief that they no doubt believe this. I think it would be important for them to stop to think that maybe I'm mistaken. Maybe this isn't God, but maybe this is me. It's getting a little ridiculous now because I absolutely know it's not God.
Yeah. Well, I'll speak from, maybe I project on this too because I've grown up with a mother who's very hardcore believer in God, but holy cow, does self-will run her life. She's got health issues, and she goes to the doctor, and she won't share with him what's going on with her health-wise. It's like she wants to control the information. But yet she's always so big on crediting God and giving God this and that, and I need to pray on that and figure out what God tells me to do. And I'm getting very confident in, confronting her because I'm seeing how it's harming her life. And I said, you know what, Mom, it is amazing to me in all these years of you ignoring your health, not taking very good care of yourself, that God for once just hasn't told you, listen to your doctors, give them the information they need and see what happens, So it's maybe that's why I project this about the God thing, but I have a mother who is very much like that. Now, she's a wonderful person. She's very nice and very kind, but it's like it is her way of guarding herself from seeing some truth about what she needs to do. Now, she has that right. It's great, but being so intimately close with her because I'm her son, I can see, I can see how that plays out in her life, and I've felt it personally plenty of times too.
Well, that all makes sense. So tell me this, Ben. How would you sponsor somebody that was a believer? Okay, they're a total believer. They're Christian or whatever, and that you're their sponsor, and they're coming to you and they're telling you that God wants them to do something that could actually end up hurting another person. For example, God wants them to get back into this broken relationship. How would you approach that?
Well, first I would try and be very respectful of their beliefs. I mean, I think at least for me, when I'm working with people, either when I had clients or it's a little bit different with sponsees, I think, because it's more of a friend relationship. But, I try and respect their beliefs and say, look, I understand that, but there's also something you maybe need to think about. Here are some things to possibly think about. You could just be feeling really, really sad and in pain right now and want that to go away. Sometimes the best thing to do is just wait a little bit, but I'll support any decision you make. I go, it depends. When I sponsor someone, I ask them from the get-go, I go, what are you looking for in a sponsor? And I try and be that. Now, I'm going to be myself, too, and it's not like if they say, oh, I want you to borrow me money all the time, that's not happening. But what I'm saying is, what are you looking for in leadership and sponsorship? I want them to feel active in their recovery because, to me, that's what it's all about. I mean, I can order somebody around if that's not my style at all, but I can if somebody wants. But I've rarely seen it work. I've rarely seen it work. At some point, we've got to get we've got to be number one in our own recovery. We've got to be driving the ship, even if driving the ship is giving it off to somebody else once in a while and saying, you steer for a while. So I think I'd just say, I understand you're in a lot of pain right now. I hear that. This might be something you want to wait a little bit on and see. Because, it's when we're ready to make a decision in a split second like that, it is almost always that impulse, that addictive impulse that we have in our head. Whereas if we give it just a little bit of time, it's amazing how like an hour or two later I can feel so much differently about something. I don't know if I answered your question very well, but I do have people that I sponsor that do believe. And we just respectfully disagree on the head honcho of it all.
Right.
Fortunately, they don't have a problem with that. I guess they wouldn't ask me to sponsor them if they did. But to me, it's about the relationship. I respect their belief. I absolutely respect their belief, and it's their right to believe that. And I don't try and change that in the least. But I do try and be logical and realistic about things too, as I see them playing out in their life, and try and give them a heads up without telling them what to do. But if they make a decision that I don't think is going to be great, I don't say, oh, you're going to regret this, because that doesn't help.
Mm-hmm.
That doesn't help anyone. I need to create that trust and that bond that they know, even if they go back out and they say, fuck you, Ben, I don't give a fuck about any of this stuff, that they know that I wasn't trying to push some program upon them that makes them feel like an outsider if they're not on board. I want them to, I just had a guy call me a while back who said, things are getting bad again. When he left, he told me, he's like, I'm just going to leave. And we talked about things for a while, and I wouldn't say talk him out of it, but I said, just know that I'm always here to talk no matter what. I go, AA, no AA, no matter what, I'm your friend. If you need somebody to talk to, call me. And he just called me recently, so that felt good. But if I was sitting there saying, you'll come out, John Barleycorn will drag you back in the door some days, and I'll be waiting here. That's just, I don't need to be an asshole. Mm-hmm. Sorry, I took that a way different direction than you're probably wanting it to go, but
that makes perfect sense. It absolutely does. And it's got to work both ways. People, have to respect our non-belief. But I liked what you said, that we're basically doing the same thing. We just have a different head honcho.
Yeah.
That's basically all there is to it.
Our friend Joe C. would say it's the same amount of work, just less delegation.
That's good.
I always
a
like
lot
that
less delegation. Yeah, that's pretty good. I'll have to remember that one. I don't know why I have never heard that one.
Yeah.
Oh boy.
But I do dig. I don't say the Serenity Prayer. I like the Serenity Statement, but I do dig the connotation of the Serenity Prayer. It's almost like a little checklist. And this comes at the end of step 3 in the 12 by 12. It's His will, not mine, be done. It's like, who am I to demand to God that your will be done? If God exists, isn't His will just going to be done anyway? It's like, your will, not mine. It's like, oh, okay, thank you, human, for giving me permission to to do my will. And it's interesting, too, I had somebody I was talking to about this. I think step 11 says praying only for knowledge of His will and the power to carry that out. But then all these other AA prayers and the Lord's Prayer are requesting all these specific things from God, whereas the hallowed 12 steps in step 11 says, all I'm going to pray for is the knowledge of your will and the power to carry that out. And all these other prayers we say are like demanding.
Yeah. I like the Serenity Prayer, too. It makes sense. And there are some atheists who pray. I know some that are meeting that do. I don't pray, and I definitely don't believe in a deity. I don't even say to myself affirmations anymore. Mm-hmm. But there's something about the Serenity Prayer that makes sense, and I have said it a lot over the course of my sobriety and repeatedly. But it does help to have the serenity to accept the things you cannot change, courage to change the things you can, and wisdom to know the difference. Because if you really stop to break it down, there's a lot of situations that we run into our life where if we just stop to ask ourselves, is this something I can change? Then let me make the change. And then the wisdom's in the difference. What can I and can I not? What can I change and what can I not change? I mean, there's some deep stuff there, and I think it is worthy to incorporate that in one's program, whether you're a believer or not, just to use as a mechanism of reflection.
Yeah.
Of what's going on, of whatever problem you're dealing with.
Yeah, it's almost like a quick little checklist of I'm having a little minor resentment or something's really eating at me. I'd say to myself, well, is this anything you can change? Well, then change that part of it. What can you change? Do that. If not, then you better work on accepting it. And I mean, there's
I
some
needed that
step 4 work
last
in there
week.
too.
Yeah. That's so. I should have been using that this week because I did something that after you do something, you can't change it, right? It's, okay,
right.
well, shoot, it's done. I can't change what I just did. I screwed up. Okay, so help me accept that. But what can I do to change my screw up? Well, I can apologize. I can acknowledge where I was wrong, and then to know the difference between what I can and can't change. In this particular case, I don't know if there. I think. Well, what I couldn't change, I can't go back. I can't change how people feel about me for what I did. I have absolutely no control over that, and I can't change what I did. I absolutely can't do that. I have to accept that what happened, but I can move forward in a different direction. I can learn from my mistake. I can apologize and acknowledge my wrong. And I can hopefully not do the same thing again. And that's using I think the tools of that serenity prayer.
And of course we don't do those things to change the way someone thinks about us, but I think if we do it from the right place and with the right motivations, we can change people's feelings. Because if I hurt someone and do something awful, if we keep doing this step thing, John, maybe we'll talk about it in 8 and 9, but it's about learning how to make a decent apology. If I can demonstrate to someone that I understand how what I did was wrong and how it likely made them feel, then I can probably change their feeling about me. Now, that can't be my intention, right? It's not, I'm going to change how they feel about me. But if I come from a genuine place and I just practice being a decent human being as best I can, absolutely, But if I just ignore it, surely they're going to be mad at me and think, wow, that guy doesn't own any of his crap. Wow. He's the same asshole I thought he was. That's speaking for me.
People make judgments of each other, and they judge us based upon our actions, and more so than our words. And if we begin to change our actions, then it will change the perception that people have of us. And it also changes our own perception that we have of ourselves. So, boy, and by the way, we definitely will be going through all of these steps. It's I think it's a very useful exercise for me personally, but it's also, I think, a great thing to do for the website. And there's a lot of people out there that seem to appreciate this discussion. So I think it's definitely something that we want to go through. But what you said about apologies, having a meaningful apology, a lot to that. Too often in my life would I want to just say an apology just to get something done with. Not an apology, I think, has to be coming from a deep knowledge that what you did was wrong. And understanding how it impacted the other person. And that's what I like about AA so much, is that we admit our wrongs. We don't necessarily say I'm sorry, although I'm sorry is definitely part of it. It's part of our communication. But we have to admit where we are wrong to ourselves and to others. I think it's very critical, because if you don't do that, it's meaningless almost. And you have to change. You got to change your behavior. If you keep doing the same crap over and over, it's absolutely meaningless.
Yeah, and that's where I can be a step apologist, because I feel like this whole walk through the steps is about gaining a good understanding of ourselves and knowledge of ourselves and how we may have harmed people and all that stuff. And I find for myself, the process of going through that, I've had and still have a lot of resentments at my dad throughout my life. But going through this process, it's a thing of humility. I think you learn about all the ways in which you may have been wrong and ways in which you can be human. And what I found as a process of that is I can be more accepting of some of the things I took issue with my dad, and realize he's just a human being that went through this stuff too. He's just as confused as I have been at different times and acted out of that. So that's been one of the great benefits of going through the steps for me, is that it's makes it just a little bit harder to judge other people. Now, I still do it all the time, but I maybe catch myself quicker, and I'm not as quick to stay there, and just a lot more forgiving in general. And when I was walking around before, when I still drank, I walked around with this air and arrogance. I don't know if people necessarily would have said that about me, but inside, it's just like I could do no wrong and everybody else was doing wrong, or the reason I was doing wrong was because everything else was wrong. And it's just such an unhealthy place to come from. And man, it was torment. to think that way all the time.
Yeah. Well, I tell you, this is a very interesting conversation, and it's very interesting to go back to where it started with steps 1 and 2, and to see how deeper we're getting now into human behavior. So that's what these things do. We get deeper and deeper into understanding ourselves so that we can make a change. So the next step we're going to talk about, and maybe we might want to combine 4 and 5 together, I don't know, but the next steps are the inventory steps. Mm-hmm. Where we really start digging deep into, finding out the truth about ourselves. Mm-hmm. And I think that will be an interesting discussion because there's all kinds of different ways of experiencing those steps and doing those steps. There's no right or wrong way as far as I'm concerned. And I think it'll be interesting to see how you approach those, how I approach those. So I look forward to that discussion.
Yeah, me too, John. And thanks for including me on this. I've really enjoyed it. I appreciate it.
And thank you. And I hope that you have a nice Easter tomorrow. You have a family coming over to see the new baby?
Well, actually, we don't. My wife's family will be coming from Wisconsin in the middle of next week, and my mom's been sick, so she hasn't visited.
Oh.
So we've had a lot of nice time to just settle in and try and work on this parenting thing. It's actually been nice.
Well, good.
And you won't see me really posting anything about he is risen or anything like that.
Oh, good. Oh, yeah.
Last year, I think I saw all the posts, and I was like, how did everybody know I just got up?
All right, Ben. Well, thank you very much. I appreciate it. We'll be talking again. Get ready for step 4 next time.
Yep. Have a nice day tomorrow if you're celebrating anything.
All right. Bye-bye.
All right.
Well, that's it for another episode of AA Beyond Belief, the podcast. I hope you enjoyed this conversation about step 3. Ben will be back next month for a discussion of steps 4 and 5. And in the meantime, we will be joined with other interesting guests that I'm sure you will enjoy. So please stay tuned, be well, and we'll be speaking again soon.